Hello, this is Mrs. Taylor, and I'm going to review projectile motion and what the graph can tell you about whatever the object is that you have either thrown or shot or dropped in the air. So let's say we have an object that we are going to shoot in the air at an initial velocity of 128 feet per second and a starting height of 68 feet. So our formula that we learned was negative 16t squared, because we're measuring in feet, plus the initial velocity, so 128 times t, plus the initial height, which was 68. And when I first graph that, it can be really hard to see the entire parabola, because if you think about it, we started at a height of 68 feet, so our initial height would be way up high on the y-axis. So I'm going to zoom out until I can see my entire parabola, and let's see if I can maneuver this a little bit. So I think if I hit this little tool and I want my y-axis, let's say 400, and my lowest y value, let's set it 0, because this is a measurement of height, let's say -2. And so we were talking about no negative measurements, so I can chop off my x-axis a little bit, and then let's change our x maximum to something reasonable. There we go. Now we can see our path of our projectile. So in our class example, it was a pumpkin. We were doing pumpkin chunking, and it started at 68 feet and an initial velocity of 128 feet per second. So looking at the graph, just pointing out a few points of interest, this y-intercept, that is where your pumpkin started. That's where it was released from the catapult. And the vertex up here, this is your maximum height. And then this x-intercept over here is, of course, when that pumpkin hits the ground. So in class, you're not going to be asked, what's the y-intercept, what does it mean? You're just going to be asked, what's the initial height? And you have to know to look at the graph and find the y-intercept. So this is the y-intercept, and that is your initial height. Initial height. And then you also have to know, well, this up here, this is your maximum. And that maximum is the vertex, and that's your maximum height. You also need to realize that the maximum height is the y-coordinate of the vertex, because remember, for every point there is two values, an x and a y. So that makes the x-coordinate when the maximum height occurs. So time of max height is the x-coordinate. So then, once you find your initial height, your vertex for your maximum height, and the time of the maximum height, you might be asked when it hits the ground. So your x-intercept, that is going to be when the, let's say our pumpkin, hits the ground. So when the, well, actually, let's just define it this way. So the pumpkin, and I guess I should make this generic. So object hits the ground, and the x-coordinate is the when. So keep in mind, your y-coordinate is your height, and if it's 0, that means it's at the ground. Another way you could think about the x-coordinate is how long the object was in the air, because if it hits the ground, that means it's no longer in the air, and the x value would represent the time it took for it to hit the ground as well. So that is a really quick summary of what we discovered through the pumpkin chunking activity and the points of interest on your parabola, your graph. The other thing we did was we discussed how if I took a horizontal line, so let's say I drew a horizontal line, and white does not show up, so let's see, a horizontal line at 100. The intersection of that horizontal line and my parabola, that represents when that pumpkin is at that height. And if you think about it, it's going to reach that height twice, once going up and then again coming down. So these intercepts here, these points of intersection, that's when the pumpkin reaches the height of 100. So the intersection is when the object reaches a height of 100 feet. And the x coordinate is when, the y coordinate is the height. And so we, in class, used our graph to find that. We used the trace function on the calculator. You could also use the table and search the table for the x and y value that you're looking for. There's lots of options. So in a second video, I'm going to show you how we did all that in the calculator. But I wanted to just step out of the calculator syntax and all that stuff to just refresh your memory about what these points meant on a graph. All right, wonderful, great, goodbye.